When you read the Bible, the people that seem to be the closest to God, heard the most from God, were the ones that were willing to lean in and prioritize prayer, prioritize communication with God. That's what these 21 days of prayer is all about. It's time to lean in. Matthew, last time we talked, I threw that question out on Instagram and said, hey, what's your beef with prayer? And got a lot of answers to it. And another answer that we got was an answer that I relate to incredibly well. It's when I pray, I just get super distracted.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about prayer. I got prayer DD. Like you heard ADD, I got pray DD. It's
that.
just something happens, man. Like when the house is quiet and I close my eyes and I got my Bible open, I just, like, my mind starts to wander.
Yeah.
And I just, thoughts begin to pop into my mind, and I get embarrassed about it because I'm supposed to be talking to God,
Right.
and here I am thinking about just all kinds of good, bad, and ugly stuff. And so that was a response that I got a lot was, man, how do you pray and battle distraction? And Jesus, again, knows exactly what this is like. He had to deal with this with his followers in Matthew 26, a really famous story during the Passion Week. Jesus takes his ride or die. Right, this is Peter, James, and John. This is the elite. They are the Navy SEALs of the 12 disciples.
They're the prayer warriors.
Yeah, exactly. These are the guys that are known for sticking with Jesus through the
Yeah.
thick and thin. He pulls them aside, and before he goes to the garden to pray, to sweat blood, to plead with the Father, he turns to those three guys and says, guys, here's what I want you to do. I want you to stay here, and I want you to pray. Stay here, focus, and pray. We read that it was in the middle of the night, and you know what happens. We read it in Matthew 26. Jesus comes back, and they're sleeping. They're not praying at all. They're not doing what he asked them to do. And Jesus said something. He says, man, and when you read this, sometimes it can come across as like a condescension, but I don't believe it is. When I read it, he says, man, your spirit was willing. Like, you wanted to do it. You wanted to stand beside me. You wanted to help me. But he
Right.
said, but your flesh was weak. And that's us.
Yeah.
Like, my spirit is willing. I want to pray, and I want to be totally focused with God, and I want to lean in and lean towards God and hear him in every way. But the reality is, like, my flesh, my mind races and wanders. And man, that is, it's not just in prayer though. That happens in school. It happens, when I'm driving, and it happens at home, and in every facet of our lives. We have to battle distractions. It's why there's so many car accidents, people texting and driving,
Right.
and they just try to do a couple of different things. But there was a book that I read a while back called Switch on Your Brain. It's by a Christian psychologist named Dr. Caroline Leaf. And she has a line in there that I think is really, now stick with me. This is science, but I'm going to bring it back into prayer.
Yeah, but she puts it on a relatable, like, understandable level.
Yeah.
Like, it's something that we can understand.
She uses this word called a milkshake multitasking is what we are guilty of. And this is how she describes it. She says, isn't it interesting how we never do one thing at a time? I would be willing to bet that the people that are watching or listening right now, you are not just sitting down, listening, or staring at the screen. You are cleaning your house.
Something else going on.
You are driving to work. You are fixing breakfast. You are brushing your teeth. You're doing something.
Right.
This is what she's talking about. And the reality is, when we do that, she says something happens in our brain that causes us not to think on a deeper level, but to stay superficial. That's what multitasking is. Your brain jumps from one thing to another. You can't really concentrate.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really go deep because your brain is doing one thing. That's a myth. She says you don't do two things at one time. Your brain can only think of one thing at one time. And so when it jumps back and forth, it stays at a real shallow level. And when I read that, I thought, man, like, that's our prayer life. Because too often we have done two things at one time. Here's an example. You don't have to admit this.
I won't if it's that bad.
How many of you, when you're driving your car and you come up to a stoplight, what do?
Yeah, yep.
You immediately pick up your phone Because you can't just stare at the stoplight. You can't do it. You have to
I
do
know
two
people-
things at once.
Now this might be a little gross, but I know people who will not go to the bathroom without their phone. Like they're like, I will not go in there without my phone. I'm like, all right. Like if you got to do two things at once, if it's that desperate, but it's like that's just how we are. Like that's who we are. Is our attention span? What's that study say? Like 5 seconds. Like that's our best attention span that we got. Is
all
5
I can think
seconds.
about is I am never going to touch your phone again.
I was talking about me.
Never
I was talking
going
about
to
everybody
touch
else.
your phone again. Here's where it ties into the Bible. In Psalm 86, I think it's verse 11, David talks about what we have is what he calls an undivided heart. Or you mentioned earlier in the ESV, it's God give us a unified heart.
Right.
And that's what it is. Our hearts are divided between 1,000 things. Instead of being solely focused on God in prayer, here's the line. Our prayer life has become prayer and something else. When you and I sit down to pray, our brain is so used to the milkshake of multitasking that it says, all right, you can pray, but what else can you do? Pray, but pull up Instagram too. Pray, but why don't you check your email right quick? Pray, but go ahead and jot some things down on the grocery list because we need to figure out what we're going to eat this week.
Get that
and I gotta
to-do
do
list
it.
going while you're
Yeah,
praying.
and so it becomes hard for us because our hearts are divided, our minds are divided. It becomes hard for us to sit down and just focus on prayer. Now, I know Jesus didn't have a cell phone, but Jesus had some patterns, though, that he used in his prayer life, so much so that, it's
Right.
described in multiple gospels.
Yeah. I got one. Mark 1, verse 35. It says that Jesus rose very early in the morning while it was still dark, and he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. Early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And that's not just Mark 1:35. You read through the Gospels and you see verses like that over and over and over again, where it says that Jesus got up and went to a desolate place. He went out early in the morning. It's not just one verse, it's everywhere that Jesus is constantly doing. This is a pattern of prayer, something that he's building in because he knows he's got to get up early, he's got to get away from the distractions, and then that's when he can pray the best.
All right, so let's give them some practical application. I want to challenge you to do something this week. You got to break that cycle of prayer and. I dare you this week, when you sit down to eat, do not pull your phone out. I dare you, when you get to the stoplight on your way to work, keep your hands on the steering wheel and just look at the red light. As soon as it turns green, you can go. I dare you just to be fully engaged in one thing. Train your mind that way so that when you sit down to pray, you're not distracted. This might seem weird, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I get distracted. When I'm opening my eyes, like I'm focused on whatever I'm looking at. And so maybe for you, it's don't close your eyes when you pray. Try praying with your eyes open. Sometimes I pray out loud because when I'm just praying in my mind begins to wander and it's like I'm having two conversations. But just pray out loud. Just voice your prayers. When you're riding in the car, voice your prayer out loud. For your devotions in the morning, voice those prayers out loud and see if that breaks the cycle.
Yeah, or maybe write them down. What I do a lot is I write them down because, man, it's really hard to write and think about something else at the same time. In fact, it's pretty much impossible. You can type and think about other things because your fingers just know. But if you try to really write your prayers down, that's one way to make sure you stay like Jesus was doing in Mark 1:35, getting away and focusing only on God. So maybe get a journal out and, just a spiral notebook if you don't want to, spend $20 on a new journal. Just get a regular piece of paper out and write the prayers down. That's a good way too. It's
obvious Jesus cared about this because he addressed this idea in one of his most public rebukes, I guess, in all of the Bible. It's the time that Martha got her hand slapped.
Right.
The story of Mary and Martha in Luke 10. Mary is undivided attention sitting with Jesus at his feet. And what is Martha? She's distracted. Instead of thinking about the prayer, she's thinking about what I need to do after the time what Jesus has already done. What are we going to eat for the meal? Is the house cleaned up? Like, what's the entertainment schedule that we have? That is you and that is me. What if we were more like Mary? What if we gave God our undivided attention and an undivided heart in prayer this week? So that's what I'm going to challenge you to do. Whatever you have to do during the day to get out of multitasking mode, to just focus on being in the moment with the person that you're with, doing the tasks that you're doing, I believe that trickle-down effect will help your prayer life. My hope and dream is that when you close your eyes to pray, that you can be undivided, solely focused on God. Not prayer but just prayer. You do that, you lean in, and I believe your prayer life will grow exponentially.